Hey guys, I just wanted to do a quick tutorial since the last assignment was about ISO. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about removing noise in your images. And there's a few ways to reduce noise in the image. So this particular shot I shot a couple of years ago. It was at sunset, and the particular area of where we were shooting at, I had to shoot at a super high ISO to just pull in enough light to take the picture. And I know last week we worked on ISO, and you probably noticed if you did the assignment that once you bumped up your ISO higher, you tend to introduce these artifacts and these noise, which sometimes we just have to do that in order to get our shot, especially if our subject is moving and you can't shoot at a super low shutter speed, so you have to shoot at a higher ISO. So the reason why I had you guys shooting at close to sunset or dusk is because you'll notice that ISO 400 is a lot harder to work with at that point, and sometimes you have to bump up the ISO once it starts getting into low light, and especially when you go indoors, you're going to have to bump up your ISO when you're shooting in manual. So what happens is we introduce noise to our image. So now I'm going to show you how to remove it. Now, there's a few ways to reduce noise, and if you notice, I'm in Lightroom here. So this will also be a little introduction to Lightroom. But Lightroom is my favorite way to reduce noise because the tool that they have in here is just so perfect. I've compared it to other plugins and different options, and it just seems to do the best job for me. So I'm going to show you how I reduce noise in Lightroom. Now, I know a lot of you just have Photoshop, and that's fine. The Color Effects, Nick Effects plugin that you have has a plugin called Define 2. So when you, like if I was to edit in Define 2, there's also a noise removal plugin in there, so you can do that in Photoshop. Mine is not working for some reason, so I wanted to show you guys how to do it in both methods, but for some reason my noise reduction is not working in Define 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop in a link to a video teaching you how to do it in Define 2 if yours is working, so that those of you who just have Photoshop could try to figure that out. I don't know why mine's not working, so I decided to just show you Lightroom and how I would do it in Lightroom, because I know a few of you do have Lightroom. So here's the, I'm in the Develop module. If you look up here to the right, I'm in the Develop part of Lightroom. And then we get all of these settings over here on the right. You'll notice this basic panel looks a lot like the raw editor in Photoshop, and that's basically what it is. So when I'm just working in Lightroom, I will use this panel to edit my images as opposed to using the raw editor in Photoshop. For the most part, my workflow is I work in Lightroom first and then export out to Photoshop. But if I was to only have one software, I talk to people about this all the time. If I was to only have one software that I could use, be it Lightroom or Photoshop, I would have to choose Photoshop because there's so many things in Photoshop that I cannot do in Lightroom. Lightroom is more like batch editing, like applying the same specific tones and exposure edits to a bunch of images at one time, but Lightroom will not allow me to go in and fix people's skin. The clone tool is not in Lightroom. Those spot healing tools and liquify and all those things I showed you guys, those are not in Lightroom. So I have to export out into Photoshop a lot just to finalize my edits. And so that's why it's super important to learn Photoshop first, I believe. So anywho, there's a tab, if you keep going down here on the right hand side, that's called Detail, and this is where we're going to find our noise reduction software or plugin. So I'm just going to zoom in here so that you can watch and see what's happening, because look how grainy it is in the back here. And that really, that would totally show in print, I believe. So I'm going to fix this. And we're just going to play around with these sliders and move them up. You'll notice how things start to blur out when I move the luminance one up. Now, if you move the detail one up, you'll watch detail comes back into the picture. So depending on how much noise I have, I may or may not use this detail slider. Because I have so much noise in this image, I'm probably going to pull that detail slider down a little bit. But if we look over at our subject, we'll start noticing she starts to look a little bit plasticky. So we have to have a nice balance here to bring detail back into her, but then remove the noise back here. There's also a contrast noise reduction, and there's a color, which this one has a lot of color noise. And it's just from shooting at that high ISO. So I am going to play around with that color noise. So yeah, so I'll just kind of look at it and eye it and see where it is. I want to stay away from having an image that looks too plasticky. But one way that I kind of overcompensate is after I apply the noise reduction, I'll go back into my basic editor into clarity and add just a punch of clarity. And that will pull back in the sharpness of all the lines around her. And I feel like that really made such a difference. So I'm going to go back to the original just to show you. Here's the original. We can see all this grain. You can even see pixels kind of being blown out, or just little artifacts happening. And once I apply the noise and the clarity, the noise reduction and the clarity, it's just such a big difference. So, and I'm going to use my little healing tool in Lightroom to just take out this little blown out pixel, which nobody would probably notice that except for me, but also notice there's just a little bit of something on the ground right here, so I'm going to remove that too. So, so yeah, so there we go. Thanks for watching.